For those of you in the jam space, you understand what I'm talking about. And at this moment, we are working. I'm actually working on a version of Civilization for Facebook. Some of you may have some skepticism about that project. But to me, I think it's kind of a brand new open field that in the early days, the very first computer games were kind of copies of board games and card games, etc. And then we kind of figured out what worked well with the computer format. In my mind, we're kind of the same place with Facebook, that we're trying some old ideas now, but it's a new kind of space with some really interesting possibilities, and we want to try and explore some of those possibilities. So stay tuned. We're having a lot of fun with our prototype, and we hope to have that out pretty soon. So I'm psyched. There are a couple things that I can kind of go into in more depth. I'd kind of like to open it up for questions and see what kind of interest you have. Sometimes people want to know, how do I get into the computer game industry? Some people are kind of interested sometimes in more the stories behind the games. How did the game come about? Where did the idea come from? What were the ups and downs of development? I can talk about game design as a career, as how the process works, how the process of making a game works in a studio. Again, kind of based on the things that you're particularly interested, etc. So I thank you for coming here, and I appreciate your interest. And I would like to kind of just open up a discussion and questions, and we'll see where that goes. Yes.
What was one of the most interesting things that players figured out from playing a lot of Civilization 4, some sort of gameplay mechanic or something that you didn't necessarily anticipate? Because I've heard there were things that came up that you were like, "Whoa, that's kind of cool."
Yeah, gamers just don't play the games the right way. I don't know. They don't understand how they're supposed to play the games. Yes, in Civ 1, there were a number of, these have now come to be called exploits, I guess there's a generic term. The problem is, as a designer, you play the game the way you intend it to be played. So you don't go off in all the weird directions and try the little diversions and things like that. That's what the playtesters are supposed to do, and they do a pretty good job of that. But generally, there's one or two things that are kind of missed in the design and testing process. One of the things with Civ, the original Civilization, was people found that by placing a city just about every other square, they could totally ramp up the production algorithm. Basically, in Civ 1, when you planted a city, you got the city square for free. So a size 1 city was actually harvesting 2 squares. I'm not sure why I did that, but it turned out to be a bad idea. And I was being generous. Actually, I'm a really nice guy. That's my problem. That's really my problem, I think, is I'm a very nice guy. I want the player to have fun. I want the player to have a lot of cool stuff to build and play with. So when the player had a small city, I was giving him all sorts of cool stuff. People found that by placing a city kind of every other square, they could totally game the system. So with the first patch, we actually introduced the idea of kind of corruption, and the more cities you had, the more corruption there would be. So it kind of discouraged you from just making hundreds of cities. And I think the Chariot Rush was kind of one of the other exploits in Civ 1. Some fans of the Chariot Rush. Chariots, I think, were 4 attack. They could move 2 squares, and if you got them early, you could kind of wipe the map with them. So that was fun while it lasted, but you were missing out on 3/4 of the game if you didn't. So we put a lot of work into that 3/4 of the game. So we also made a change for that. But I have to say, players are very creative, and in almost every game, they find a strategy, a way to win that we didn't anticipate. And thank goodness for forums and patches and things like that, because it's fun while, again, for a moment to win the game by exploiting, but you're missing out on a lot of the stuff that we put in there. So it's best if we find those things. Yes.
Now that the video game industry makes more money than the movie industry, do you find that video games kind of cater more towards just making a lot of money or just making a really great game? And do you think positive or a negative that now the video game industry makes so much money?
I think overall it's a positive. I think we have an incredible variety of great games to choose from. When you go to your local video game retailer, it certainly has been an issue, actually, as long as I can remember, the whole kind of creativity versus commercial aspect of it. Are there too many sequels? Or is not enough original gaming? I've seen both sides of that discussion. And I really don't come down hard on one side or the other. I've been very, very fortunate to be allowed to be creative and make the games I wanted to make. I realize not everybody gets that opportunity, and I'm very fortunate in that regard. So I've seen a lot of opportunities for creativity. I've played a lot of games, however, that I did want. The sequel, this was cool, so sequels aren't driven only by the idea that we can make this game cheap. There actually is quite a demand for sequels. Thank goodness, because we're on Civ 4. We're very happy that sequels can be successful. But we certainly don't want that to happen to the extent that it dries up the creativity of new games. What I've seen, however, is that we'll find a game that's really cool and original and say, why aren't they making more of these really cool original games? Well, it's not easy to make a really cool and original game, and there are probably 7 or 8 games that started out to be really cool and original, but ended up being not so cool and not quite so original. So I'm not looking for sympathy here, but it is not that easy to make a video game. Part of our job is to make it look easy in hindsight. If you're kind of questioning why did this work that way, or this, then we kind of haven't done our job. Our job is actually to make you feel like this is the only game that could have been made on this topic. This is exactly how I would have made it. But that process actually requires us to test 7 or 8, 25, 100 different ways of doing it until we find the one that feels natural and obvious from the beginning. I think we're certainly a valid discussion that we've had, an ongoing discussion of, is there enough creativity? Are there too many sequels? Whatever. But I think if you kind of go to the game store, I would rather go to a video game store today than in any time in the history of video games in terms of finding a cool game to play. I have warm, fuzzy, hazy memories of the good old days, but when I go back to those games, the clouds part, and it's like, what? We had fun with this game? We had a lot richer imaginations, I guess, back then. But thank you for that question. Don, could you maybe choose someone? I
was going to say, why don't we do this? I'll grab a mic stand in a sec, and if you guys just want to line up here. So, one up to questions.
Yes.
Keep in mind, we only have till 1 o'clock.
We've got 40 minutes.
We're good.
We got plenty of time.